I invite our next speaker to the stage. Speaking on the topic of Malaysia Rising and the strategic opportunities and challenges the country may face. Can I introduce and can we have a round of applause for former Minister of International Trade and Industry, Yang Berhormat Tan Sri Rafidah Aziz.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Atul Parvatia, our panel members, Dr. Singh, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the kind invitation by the organizers for me to speak today on Chindia Rising, Strategic Opportunities and Challenges with the rise of China and India in the context of Malaysia. And I am indeed looking forward to our discussions in terms of question and answer and dialogue together with our panel members. Certainly this subject has riveted the world ever since the shift of the global economic axis moved from the west to the east, especially in particular to East Asia in the Asia-Pacific. And certainly the opening up of China has been a tremendous boost for the Asian region as a whole. And I would dare say it is really a loud wake-up call for the economic giants of yesteryear, particularly the US and Europe. Such an opening up of a centrally planned economy such as China is having and certainly will continue to have impact and reverberations as decision makers everywhere look at the dynamism of that nation, and decision makers not only in the public but also in the private sector. We know that China began its march into the mainstream global economic arena by presenting to the world, especially to those who were willing to overcome the initial constraints and to persevere, the huge potential market of 1.339 billion people. And even today, the Chinese market is a very strong pull factor and for everyone and anyone having anything to sell to China. Certainly, the first decade of the more liberalized China is about access into that market, introducing imported goods which could easily find favor amongst the increasing number of consumers with higher disposable incomes. The rise of entrepreneurship, for example, was a major contributor to the higher incomes. The liberalization of the economy to private enterprise was also accompanied by strategic public sector planning to identify champions amongst the particular industrial sectors to be nurtured and to become regional and global players. These companies represented the wide spectrum of industrial sectors, from electrical electronics and consumer products to engineering and also automotive product sectors. The performance of those chosen as champions or those best in class were benchmarked against the prevailing global best. And clearly, the objective was to be able to compete with the best and even to surpass them. Replicated along the same lines in other economic sectors, such as the services sectors, including by the new private entrepreneurs, the approach has now realized a generation of Chinese companies which are making strong inroads abroad and which are competing successfully in the Chinese domestic market with the global entities from other places such as Europe and the US. On a personal level, I have witnessed the metamorphosis of China from the cocoon state to the China that we know today. I was in China when everyone was in Mao Zedong blue and gray, and there were only bicycles on the road. I was there 2 months after the Tiananmen incident, during which almost every foreigner left China, and China was roundly condemned by the West. Malaysia had already arranged for the Trade Investment Mission at that time because we saw the potential of going into China early to touch base and to establish the necessary context for our private sector. The incident in Tiananmen was a domestic affair, and we went there for business. It was not exactly a serene time, but Malaysia was regarded as a friend at a difficult time, and our private sector was able to assess for themselves what business was like and how business was conducted in China. Of course, at that time, business was conducted by government enterprises. Of course, it was a matter of time before the Chinese government did a stocktake of the country. And the result was the opening up of China to the world. China started to liberalize, and liberalization is a very strong factor in investment decisions. Globalization requires liberalization. And for China, the country rapidly became globalized in the process of liberalization. And the rest, of course, is history. People can write many books on it. Today, China is an acknowledged economic superpower, no longer an economic power as such, rivaling the United States. Certainly, China can easily learn from the mistakes that other superpowers make in the context of economics government, and I'm sure they're watching what's happening in the US today. However, now we see China that is keen to integrate with her neighbors in East Asia. And it is in this context of regional integration that we should view countries like Malaysia vis-a-vis the rise of China and India, the new giants. India too has begun to liberalize and open up and has attracted investors. And goods and services suppliers from all over the world come to take advantage of the expanding middle class and to participate in the infrastructure development of India. India's opening up may not be as dramatic as China, because India was already a democratic country with a private sector enterprise, or rather private enterprise sector. And it was a bureaucratic constraints in the main which kept India from being open in the past. Nevertheless, India and China now both provide opportunities as well as challenges for countries like Malaysia. And Malaysia needs to view India and China from these two perspectives, i.e. challenges and opportunities. It is to Malaysia's advantage that both China and India are looking towards the neighbors in the region for synergistic strength and for harnessing complementarities and diversities for mutual benefit. The various arrangements already in place and are being put in place now are in the main market-driven and targeted for the private sector interest and benefit. On the bilateral front, Malaysia has already taken steps to integrate with India and China. For example, Malaysia and India has concluded the Malaysia-India Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement, which covers trade in goods, trade in services, movement of natural persons, investment, legal and constitutional issues, as well as economic cooperation. And this agreement with India will provide preferential market access for major export products such as petroleum products and palm oil, chemical and chemical products, petroleum products, and also for Malaysian service providers in the construction-related activities and infrastructure development. And this agreement provides opportunities for them to enter these sectors. On a broader front, India and ASEAN, of which Malaysia is a member, have operationalized the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement in goods 1st January 2010, and negotiations are going on to conclude the agreement on trade in services and investments. Similarly, China has been proactive in forging stronger economic regionalization with ASEAN as a group, as well as with the East Asian economies as a whole. The ASEAN-China Free Trade Area Agreement was fully implemented in January 2010 for the ASEAN 6, which is Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Singapore, Philippines, and Singapore and Thailand, and has created now, with the ASEAN 6, the world's third largest free trade area after the European Union and NAFTA. And the other four new ASEAN members, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, will complete tariff elimination on both goods in 2015. In parallel to the free trade agreement, China and ASEAN, together with Japan and Korea, under the entity called ASEAN Plus 3, have enhanced cooperation in 20 areas. The financial crisis of 1997 has been a prime mover of such close economic integration, as the East Asian economies see mutual benefits of such strategic collaboration and cooperation. In fact, it was China which proposed the setting up of an East Asian free trade area to include the ASEAN 10, China, Japan, and Korea, which would considerably expand the outreach and size of the ASEAN-China free trade area already in place. And in addition, Japan has proposed the establishment of a comprehensive economic partnership for East Asia, or called CEPIA, which will comprise of the ASEAN 10, China, Japan, and Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand, or ASEAN Plus 6. So certainly these developments amongst the countries in this part of the world, in ASEAN, ASEAN Plus 3, and ASEAN Plus 6 center upon ASEAN. And because they include as well China and India, provides the way forward for closer business collaboration and synergistic linkages amongst the private sector of the region, and would also provide the potential market that companies around this area of this region needs. Market access and preferential treatment in each other's markets should spur entrepreneurs to seek out new and enhanced business opportunities within the larger free trade area now being created. And I'm sure that today's sessions have also alluded to that, and details have been given as how to go about it. In the context of Malaysia, China, and India, there are already in these countries regional and global players in key sectors of industry and services, which can strategize to collaborate in order to expand and extend their market outreach to other parts of the world. Entities which presently in China, India, and Malaysia only operate within their respective domestic markets should begin to think and plan to operate as regional conglomerates, collaborating again to galvanize individual strength into collective competitiveness. Competitors in particular, and those in those industries that lend themselves to collaboration, should begin to think in terms of working together in order to gain stronger footholds and market shares. There is also much scope and potential for establishing regional supply chains and distribution networks. The ASEAN Free Trade Area itself is a large market of 592 million people, total GDP of USD $1.9 trillion, and GDP per capita of member countries ranging from the lowest USD 1,100 for Myanmar to 57,200 for Singapore, and with Malaysia at 8,029 USD. But for Malaysia, the purchasing power parity is about 14,000 actually. The diversity in resource endowments and level of economic development within the ASEAN region is in itself a source of strength to attract both Indian investments and Chinese investments, as well as intra-ASEAN investments. ASEAN has resources and capabilities along the entire chain of the production process, and there are industries which can attract such investments, ranging from resource-based industries, manufacturing, oil and gas, agriculture-based products and services, and transport, such as aviation. Focus is now being given to enhancing physical connectivity with the master plan on ASEAN connectivity. In time, this could be extended to go beyond the ASEAN region to include China and India, particularly in the light of the move towards the proposed establishment of CPR, which I alluded to earlier. There are now ongoing efforts at regional integration in the financial and capital market sector, and the ASEAN exchange linkage will see, hopefully this year, the initial linking up of stock exchanges in Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, with others in the region coming on board later. In the non-financial services sector, there is already a broad-based liberalization program for the liberalization of 128 services subsectors, with commitments to allow higher foreign equity ownership in various sectors, such as business sectors, education, distribution, and maritime transport services, as well as commitments on financial services and air transport. To date, total services subsectors already covered under liberalization commitments have reached 80, and the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services go beyond the WTO requirements. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in today's globalized economic environment, where economic interdependence is the outcome of the erosion of economic and market boundaries, one cannot speak of any country or economy in isolation. There has to be at least a regional context in which to assess the long-term viability of an economy in the increasingly competitive global environment. It is no longer appropriate to label countries or economies as we did it before as so-called tigers, simply because of a sudden spurt of dynamism and growth. As shown in past experience, economic tigers can suddenly morph into toothless cats when external shocks impact upon their less than resilient domestic economies, and economic dislocations bring about instability on many fronts. Escalating prices of oil can quickly result in domestic economic disarray for those economies totally dependent on imports of the resource, as would also economic instability in traditional and large markets such as Europe, US, and Japan. Recent developments are clear examples where the economic linkages forged in the globalization process become the same conduits for the contagion effect of any economic disruption and volatility triggered in major economic centers of the world. Case in point, the financial collapse in the US, triggered in the US, but with reverberations right across the world. In fact, the more open the economy of any country and the more linked it is to the global markets for both goods and services, the faster and greater the impact. The best any one country can do is to institute mechanisms to insulate, to whatever extent possible, the domestic economy from long-term irreparable damage. And today, it is not merely the contagion effects of economic instability and volatilities which countries of any region should worry about. There are now instabilities that are social and social-political in nature that can spill over beyond domestic borders, triggered by sensitive issues which can revolve around religion, dissatisfaction with glaring domestic economic inequities and disparities, and fighting for whatever people demand in the name of particular freedoms. It is already happening in the Middle East. And over the last 3 days, Norway had this shock about someone with some very extremist views can actually undo so many things in Norway. Ladies and gentlemen, today, when we talk about China, India, Malaysia, ASEAN, and the region, it should no longer be about merely economics, business and trade, or about investments. Economic success, particularly countries in our region, should essentially be an enabler to bring about domestic and from there on regional economic and social stability. Each country needs to focus on growth with distribution and strive for more equitable distribution of income and opportunities to ensure that there are no untenable inequities and disparities domestically which can trigger instability. Today, regional economic growth and cooperation within East Asia has opened up cross flows of trade and investment, as well as of human resource to meet demand for the workers in particular countries. This in itself can ease pressure of unemployment in the manpower exporting country, and also it can become a source of foreign exchange remittances. Managed well, the new economic diaspora of regional nationals can be a source of synergistic strength in East Asia. And we are indeed talking about people from China, India, Indonesia, everywhere moving in this region. And we should see all this in that more macro context. Today, China and India are helping to galvanize the strengths and potential of East Asia, while at the same time, companies from these two nations are becoming strong regional and global players. Similarly too, Malaysia is nurturing regional and global entities, and they must be in a position to compete. The various economic arrangements in which Malaysia, China, and India are signatories provide potential for enhanced cross flows of trade and investment, as well as technical and economic cooperation. And specifically, in the context of the ASEAN Plus 3 grouping, where China is a member, dialogues and interaction have gone beyond the free trade area parameters into collectively addressing issues such as energy and environment. There is also the implementation within the ASEAN Plus 3 with China of initiatives in 2010 which bodes well for the future of this grouping. The bilateral swap network launched in 2000 in response to the 1997 Asian financial crisis was multilateralized in 2010 under what is called the Chiang Mai Initiative Multilateralization. It has a total size of US $120 billion, with 80% coming from China, Japan, and Korea, and 20% from ASEAN. In addition, the ASEAN Bond Market Initiative to promote local currency denominated bond markets was put into place. And to support the issuance of corporate bonds in the region, a credit, guarantee, and investment facility was established as a trust fund in the Asian Development Bank with initial capital of US $700 million. These are only a few of the concrete examples of regional economic cooperation under the ASEAN +3, where we have Malaysia involved together with China. On the broader regional entity of ASEAN +6, which includes not only ASEAN with Malaysia, but also ASEAN and China and India, there are 3 areas of economic collaboration being pursued to effect regional integration, which is being envisaged as this huge economic entity of the future. And these areas are promoting economic partnership through further trade investment facilitation and liberalization, enhancing connectivity through physical and institutional infrastructure development, and improving the quality of growth within the region by addressing and overcoming growth constraints and having constant policy dialogues. So therefore, the regionalization of East Asia, wherein Malaysia, China, and India are situated together, can be viewed as 3 concentric circles. There is ASEAN as the core and the innermost circle. There is the ASEAN plus China, Japan, and Korea in the second circle, and the ASEAN +6, which includes India, in the outer circle. And right at the nucleus of all the circles is Malaysia, with its strategic, geographical, and economic location and positioning, able to serve effectively and efficiently all the 3 circles, having already the necessary economic and physical connectivities with all the members within the 3 circles. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk of Chindia Rising, it is a positive situation that Chindia is rising in the East, or more specifically in East Asia. Chindia Rising should never be seen as casting shadows on the neighborhood, but rather as shedding more light on the region, onto the region, and creating greater visibility for the region. Of course, when you shed some light, there will be some heat felt by countries like Malaysia. But the light and energy from Chindia Rising and from the ongoing and yet to be exploited synergistic efforts in regionalization, which I have mentioned earlier, is tremendous and should be strategically harnessed for mutual benefit. Certainly, as in the case of ASEAN, the diversity within the larger East Asian region, including China and India, provide for a wider spectrum of synergies, although managing diversity of ambitions and domestic constituency interests and demands in the context of regional objectives can be a big challenge in itself. So therefore, Malaysia, China, and India, together with their partners in the region of East Asia, to my mind, have 3 sets of challenges to address and overcome for now and the future. 1, the challenge of effective domestic governance in order to address the issues which can trigger instability, such as poverty and economic disparities, and to meet the rising expectations and aspirations of the new young generation, who can now witness in real time events happening globally and regionally. Today, new demands go beyond those economic in nature, and public governance must essentially extend significantly beyond that of simply chartering economic growth. And sadly to say, sometimes when we focus on the rise of any economies in any part of the world, a lot of the focus and attention would be on the economic side, regardless of what's happening domestically, whether there is equitable distribution, whether it is a good focus on the social aspects and socioeconomic aspects. The second set of challenges is that of competition within the region to attract investments and to gain markets, as well as competition amongst regional entities to find their niches in the larger global marketplace. Certainly, the business sector must be adequately prepared for the ongoing regional liberalization, doing what it takes to succeed in the extended and expanded markets, which now becomes a big domestic market. The governments have provided the market access. The business sector must do the rest of the work. The third category of challenges is in the area of economic and social economic cooperation in the region, going beyond what is already in place and being planned to effect long-term regional stability. Regional resilience, to my mind, is built upon individual domestic resilience of each regional member country. It is important to ensure that the region can collectively overcome economic volatilities which are triggered either from within or from external sources. And we have so many lessons already learned from there. Regional policy decisions are required to institute relevant regional safety nets and economic circuit breakers to minimize the impact of such economic dislocations. In fact, to my mind, the regional economic agenda with Malaysia, China, India, and the rest of the neighbors together, this regional economic agenda must be pragmatic and driven by common survival instincts rather than by political expedience. There are lessons that can be learned from other groupings elsewhere, such as the European Union. And finally, many refer to the events and developments in our part of the world as the rise of the Pacific century. And some talk about the Asian century. And I think a lot of debate has gone on around this topic. But I'm asking a question. Why are people talking about only a century? If it's going to be an Asian rising, why only for a century? Why is it that the economic dynamism of Asia, and specifically of East Asia, be viewed only for a span of a century? I think somebody who brought up the idea of the Pacific century, the Asian century, didn't realize that they are condemning us to just one century of any worthwhile growth. And after that, we probably become basket cases like the British Empire. So, to me, when I say why only for a span of century, this is the question that both present and future generation of leaders and decision makers in both the public and private sectors must ponder and act upon. And I do believe that given the right strategies, Chindia Rising, together with the rise of East Asia as the new global economic hub, will be going on for time to come, not limited to just a century. Thank you very much.
If we could just have a round of applause, please, too, from the audience. Professor Dr. Jag Seth, the Chief Executive Officer of Martrade, Dato Naharuddin Nordin, President of Help University College, Datuk Dr. Paul Chan, and finally, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's panel discussion, Dr. Atul Parvatia.
And once again, it's my privilege to have a distinguished team over here, distinguished experts. First of all, let me say thank you to